Chapter 12. Sin must be buried inside love. Spill the blood of disobedience and act in obedience. Jesus is the body of God. To give us salvation, he came in the shape of a person who has sin. By spilling all blood and water on the cross, God received glory. Because he is an example to us, we must also spill all sin, that is, the blood of disobedience inside our spirits. Due to Adam disobeying in Eden, we must spill out sin that flows to us. Then God receives glory and peace rests inside our spirits. When God gives the word, and I just let it remain there, this becomes disobedience. If I move that word into action, this becomes obedience, and God receives it. For light to be revealed, I must strike myself and offer action to God. Until such action is revealed as glory, my sacrifice is needed. Jesus bore the cross to offer up glory to the Father. To come with God's plan and offer up to him in obedience was work that Jesus was to do. That is why, if I only keep the word with me, Isaiah 1:15 says, "Your hands are full of blood." It becomes the sin of disobedience. He said in James 2:26, "Faith without deeds is dead." In order for God to receive the act of obedience, we must also spill out the blood of disobedience and act in obedience. For peace and joy to come to this earth, such work must be perfectly fulfilled from inside us. Take off the outer clothing. Jesus did not come to this earth to give peace, but Luke 12:51 says that he came to bring division. Father and son, mother and daughter, mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, they can have conflict. This means that when God's truth comes inside the house, war arises. But if we know war as fighting in the family, we are looking at the word literally. It is not that kind of fighting. Father and son, mother and daughter, mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, these are things connected by lust inside my spirit. In order for God's truth to become revealed, we must look at the word in the spirit. Yet there are lustful accessories stuck to the spirit, so there is no space into which truth can go. In Genesis 35:4, God told Jacob to bury accessories under the oak at Shechem. So we must also throw away accessories. We must bury our lustful things beneath the cross. Our gold and silver have corroded, as James 5:3 tells us, so we must take them off. The time has come when the word that was covered by my knowledge is taken off and tidied away. The saints of this era must take off their outer clothing, which they wear thickly by the knowledge-based word. When Jesus bore the cross and died, Matthew 27 tells us the curtain tore. They kept the law, which was given to Israel so they could live, was kept only as laws. The curtain tore because they could not meet God. Through Jesus, they can meet God. The Bible was given to us so that we could live, but we learned it only as knowledge. Because we cannot meet God, such learning must be torn. The outer clothing must be taken off. Accessories stuck to the spirit and strings that are connected by lust must be disconnected. Jericho must be destroyed. When Joshua sent 2 spies to Jericho in Joshua 2, the prostitute Rahab was there. The 2 spies told Rahab that Jericho would be destroyed. A scarlet cord was tied, and they made the promise that if her parents, siblings, and whole family were to come to the house, they would be saved. The scarlet cord is the sign of salvation. It is the method to be saved when Jericho becomes destroyed. Spiritually refers to the spirit that has become hardened by the word, which was piled up literally and only as knowledge. Trapped inside that hardened spirit is Rahab, that is life. By the cord of the word, we must pull up life which is inside and let the life inside our spirits meet God. Life must open its eyes and say, God is like this. Life becomes grafted to God. Now, life and God must be united as one. Until life, which is inside, is pulled out of us, it is most difficult. Because I, the hardened Jericho of my frame, exists, it is difficult to destroy it. No matter who it is, there is no one to hold up his or her head, as all will melt. As we think of the love of the cross, onto which he let even blood and water spill to give us salvation, as we think of the love of the cross, onto which he let even blood and water spill to give us salvation, we must only give thanks and be joyful. Would it be all right that complaints and dissatisfaction come out due to the things of the world? We must only have thankfulness that spring out from a deep place of the Spirit. The day is coming when the Jericho inside our spirits will become destroyed. The land of the covenant changes to the land of God. Now all things are not mine, but belong to God. He sent the angel of God inside our spirits, so those who are prepared will be saved when Jericho becomes destroyed. The others are occupying the inside of our spirits, and it became a hardened Jericho. When it becomes destroyed, the life inside it, Rahab, will be saved. God also strikes the kings of the other inside Jericho. We had played the part of king in God's place, and in order for him to find his place, Jericho must be destroyed. Then it changes into the land of God. We must take off royal clothes. The prophet Jonah went into the city of Nineveh. He conveyed the word of Jehovah. Jonah 3:4 says, 40 more days and Nineveh will be overthrown. The king of Nineveh, who received that word, took off his royal clothes, put on sackcloth, and sat down in the dust. The king made all people and animals wear sackcloth, fast, call urgently on God, and give up their violent and evil ways. When God saw them repenting, he changed his will and did not bring down destruction. When the king took off his royal clothes, he moved God's heart. To take off royal clothes refers to taking off the things I have worn by my thought and lust. It is also to abandon myself. Then miracles arise, where the land of the Spirit that was a desert blooms beautifully like a rose. If I abandon my desert-like self before the word, a beautiful flower, such as a rose, will bloom from inside. However, it is not easy to abandon myself, even if death comes before the eyes. The one who cannot abandon himself or herself is the human. Now, in the era of love, the toughest human disposition must be thrown away in order to live. I must take off my royal clothes. Then the era of God's royal authority enters, and a new era opens. Cut down, leave only the root. In Daniel 4, many birds had come to the branches of one tree. Beasts had come and eaten and lived, but God said to cut down the tree and leave the stump and roots. Each of us is a tree stump. This is a metaphor. Our thoughts, lust, arrogance, and pride were to live inside the tree. From inside that tree, we lived while being happy, satisfied, finding pleasure, and enjoying ourselves. I had spent my time pretending to be God. That tree is precisely I, myself. But God came and said to cut it down and leave only the root. This root is the life of God, and we must leave the only one life and cut down the tree. The time has now come to cut down this tree. God uses me when my lustful self ends. My entire name has not yet ended, so how could he possibly use me? God uses the person whose all the days of his or her life had come. God uses the person who has died. A person who has died has no words. God begins inside the person who has died. I must die so that God can work. If God's new era should open, the end of all the days of my life must come. The end must come for the beginning to start. When Satan pleaded Job's case, God said, "Very well then, he is in your hands, but you must spare his life." So Satan took everything from Job and left his one life alone. Job overcame the difficult suffering and revered God until the end. So God blessed him with twice as much as he had before. Just as God took everything and left Job's one life alone, I must leave only the root inside myself and cut down everything else so that he can do with me as he pleases. Sin must be buried inside God's love. In Genesis 35, God commanded Jacob to go to Bethel and build an altar. All of Jacob's household and servants gave him all foreign gods they had in their hands and the rings from their ears. Jacob buried them under the oak at Shechem. If I should meet God, I must throw away all lustful things that I had until now. In other words, I must throw away my ornaments. Spiritually, the oak at Shechem represents the cross. The cross is God's love, and ornaments refer to sin inside us. He was telling them to bury their sins so they could be changed into God's people. Regardless of great or small sins, God tells us to bury them all. God was insistent on burying our sins and saving us. This is not judgment, but is to save. Jesus came to the world not to judge it, but save it. And salvation is only through Jesus. God's love had gone inside the place covered with sin. So now God seizes sin inside thought, that is, Satan. The reason we cannot become one is because each of our thoughts is different. Thought belongs to humanly attachments, and humanly attachments belong to the flesh. Humanly attachments came through the body, the flesh and blood. We cannot meet God by flesh and blood. To meet him, we must disconnect the lustful string of flesh and blood. To disconnect the line of lust is to bury sin. Sin is something that must be buried inside God's love. The dragon must be put inside the bottomless pit. If God's word that is opened in the spirit enters our spirits, the person I melts down at a moment without my knowing. It has now become time that God seizes the dragon and puts it inside the bottomless pit. The time has come when my lustful self cannot move. It has become time when we only move by God's will. When it seems like dragons have gone inside, they come out again. But Revelation 20 shows us that God binds the dragon and throws it in the bottomless pit. At that place, I cannot move in any way that I want, and I totally surrender to him. God binds the dragons of the world, throws them inside the bottomless pit, and locks it up. And he opens a new era. In the era of love, this work begins. He seizes the dragon, and it was the serpent of old. If the serpent of old shows, the dragon has been captured. The bottomless pit refers to the end of the dragon's movement. Our movement has ended, so my lustful self must now go inside the grave. The dragon must be put inside the bottomless pit so that it cannot act. Then our thought and all things of lust become trapped.